My name is Margaret. I'm 58 years old. And 14 months ago, I walked into my kitchen on a Tuesday morning and my husband of 30 years was simply gone. No argument. No warning. No goodbye. Just a white envelope on the kitchen table, sitting exactly where he always placed his coffee cup. I stood there in my robe, hair undone, holding it for almost 3 minutes before I opened it. My hands weren't shaking because I was scared. They were shaking because somewhere deep down, I already knew. What was written inside that letter didn't just end our marriage. It cracked open 30 years of silence and forced me to look at every single thing I had refused to see. And here's what nobody tells you: he had kept a secret. A quiet, devastating secret. One I never saw coming. Before I tell you what actually happened, if you're new here, please like this video and subscribe. And drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? I want to know who's sitting with me tonight. Now let me take you back to where it all began. That Tuesday started like every other Tuesday for the past 11 years. I woke up at 6:15. I came downstairs. I filled the kettle. But the moment my foot hit the bottom step, something felt wrong. The house had a different kind of quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Empty quiet. His jacket wasn't on the hook by the door. His keys weren't on the counter. I walked to the garage and stood in the doorway for a long moment. His car was gone. I told myself he had an early appointment. I told myself I had simply forgotten. I walked back to the kitchen and that's when I saw it. A white envelope. Centered perfectly on the table. My name written on the front in his handwriting. Not a note. Not a sticky pad scribble. A sealed envelope. The kind you don't open casually. The kind that means something has already been decided. My coffee was still brewing. The morning was still normal. But nothing after that moment ever would be again. I met Gerald when I was 27. He was quiet, steady, the kind of man who fixed things without being asked. We married fast, 11 months after our first date. Built a life in a house we could barely afford. Raised 2 kids in rooms we painted ourselves. For a long time, it was enough. More than enough. But somewhere around year 16, something shifted. Not dramatically. Not with a fight or a revelation. It just cooled. Like a fire nobody remembered to feed. He started staying in the garage longer. I started going to bed earlier. We stopped finishing each other's sentences and started avoiding them altogether. I noticed. I just never said anything. And neither did he. That was our pattern. Swallow it. Move forward. Keep the calendar full so the silence has less room to breathe. 30 years. 2 kids grown and gone. 3 houses. 1 miscarriage we never properly talked about. A life that looked completely fine from the outside. And that envelope was now sitting in my hand, about to tell me exactly how wrong I had been. Looking back now, the signs were everywhere. I just never let myself land on them long enough to ask questions. 8 months before he left, he started cooking dinner alone on Sundays. I thought it was a hobby. I left him to it. 6 months before, he framed an old photo of us from 1994 and placed it quietly on his desk. I walked past it every day. Never once asked him why that photo. Why that moment? Why now? 3 months before, our daughter called me and said, "Mom, is Dad okay?" I told her he was fine. I hadn't actually asked him in weeks. Then there was the night in November. I came downstairs at midnight for water and found him sitting at the kitchen table in the dark. Just sitting. Not on his phone. Not reading. Just sitting in complete silence with his hands flat on the table. I asked if he was all right. He said yes. I went back to bed. I didn't push. I never pushed. And he never volunteered. That was us. That had always been us. And it was slowly killing something neither of us could name. I sat down at the kitchen table. Kettle still boiling behind me. I slid my finger under the seal slowly, like some part of me believed that if I opened it carefully enough, it wouldn't be real. The first line stopped me completely. He didn't start with, "I'm sorry." He didn't start with, "I have to go." He started with, "Margaret, I want to thank you." And then he listed things. Specific things. The night I stayed up with him when his mother was in surgery. The way I always cut the crusts off his sandwiches even 20 years into marriage without him ever asking. The birthday where everything went wrong and I laughed instead of cried. Small things. Invisible things. Things I had completely forgotten. Things I didn't even know he had noticed. And with every line, my chest got tighter. Because this wasn't the letter of a man who had stopped caring. This was the letter of a man who had been paying attention to every single detail, quietly, privately, alone for decades. And that made what came next so much harder to read. Because after all that tenderness, he had 7 words left. And those 7 words took my breath away completely. The 7 words were this: I don't think you ever saw me. No anger behind them. No accusation. Just 7 quiet words sitting on the page like they had been waiting 30 years to be written. I read them 3 times. Then I kept going. He wrote about the miscarriage. The one we buried in silence in 2003 and never once returned to. He said he had cried alone in his car for 2 weeks straight. That he had waited for me to bring it up. That I never did. He wrote about the promotion he didn't take in 2011, the one in Edinburgh, because I had just started my new job and he didn't want to disrupt my momentum. He never told me that was the reason. I had assumed he simply didn't want it. I had been wrong. Completely wrong. He wrote about dreams he had quietly folded up and stored away. Not with resentment. With resignation. And that was somehow worse. There was no villain in this letter. No betrayal. No other woman. Just a man who had spent 30 years feeling invisible inside his own marriage. And a woman, me, who had let it happen without ever realizing it. I put the letter down. Stood up. Walked to the sink. Turned the tap on and just stood there with water running over my hands. Not crying. Not thinking. Just standing. Then I laughed. One short, sharp laugh, the kind that surprises even you. Because my first actual thought was, he folded this letter perfectly. Crisp corners. Straight edges. Even in leaving, Gerald was neat. Then the laugh stopped. And something else moved in. I turned the tap off. Picked up my phone. Called my sister Carol. She answered on the second ring. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. Not a single word. I stood there in complete silence for about 10 seconds. Then I said, never mind, and hung up. I read the letter again. Then again. Then a third time. Looking for something I might have misread. Looking for a different version of what it said. There wasn't one. I got dressed. Made the bed out of pure habit. Came back downstairs. Sat in his chair, not mine, for the first time in years. And that's when I noticed it. The letter had a second page. Folded separately. Tucked behind the first. I hadn't seen it until now. I unfolded the second page slowly. It was shorter than the first. Just 1 paragraph. His handwriting slightly less steady, like he had written this part last, when his hand was tired or his nerve was running out. He started by saying he wasn't writing to punish me. He wasn't writing to win anything. He said he had spent 3 months deciding whether to leave quietly or leave honestly. He chose honestly. For the first time in a long time, he chose honestly. Then he wrote the one thing he was asking of me. Not asking me to call him. Not asking me to fight for the marriage. He asked me one question. A single question. He wrote, I just want to know if you were happy. Not for my sake. For yours. Because I genuinely don't know. And I realized recently I never once asked you. Not properly. And that is my failure too. I sat completely still. Because in 30 years of marriage, through every season, every silence, every room we shared, Gerald had never once asked me that. And the devastating part, the part that cracked something open in my chest, was that I didn't know the answer either. I sat with that question for 2 hours. Just sat with it. Didn't eat. Didn't move. The house stayed quiet around me like it was waiting too. At some point the kettle had gone cold. The morning had gone. I picked up my phone 4 times. Put it down 4 times. The 5th time, I didn't put it down. I scrolled his name. Gerald. No nickname. No emoji. Just Gerald, the way I had saved it in 2009 when I got my first smartphone and never once thought to change it. I pressed call before I could talk myself out of it. It rang once. Then twice. And somewhere in that second ring I started rehearsing words. Apologies. Explanations. Defenses I hadn't even decided I needed yet. Then he picked up. And every single word I had rehearsed dissolved completely. I said nothing. He said nothing. Just open air between 2 people who had shared a bed for 30 years, suddenly not knowing how to begin a sentence. 12 seconds passed. I counted later. I know that sounds strange. But I counted. Because those 12 seconds felt like the most honest moment we had shared in years. Then he spoke first. And it wasn't what I expected. Not even close. He said my name. Just that. Margaret. Not a question. Not a greeting. Just my name, spoken quietly like he was confirming I was real. I exhaled. Then I said his. Gerald. And somehow that was enough to break something loose. He spoke first. He said he hadn't slept. That he was sitting in a premiere and off the motorway eating vending machine biscuits and feeling ridiculous. And I don't know why, but that detail, that specific, ordinary, slightly pathetic detail, cracked me open completely. I started crying. Not dramatically. Just quietly. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere you forgot existed. He heard it. He didn't fill the silence with reassurances. He just stayed on the line. Let me have it. After a while I asked him why he hadn't just talked to me. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I tried Margaret 3 times in the last 2 years. You were always just about to do something else. I didn't argue. Because I remembered those moments. I had told myself they weren't important. He had walked away each time believing he was. Then he said something that made me laugh, sudden and unexpected, straight through my tears. And in that single laugh, 30 years shifted. He said, I packed 3 pairs of socks and forgot a phone charger. I've been borrowing one from the receptionist since yesterday. I laughed again. Harder this time. And then I cried again immediately after. Because that was Gerald. That had always been Gerald. Prepared for the emotional earthquake. Completely unprepared for the practical aftermath. We talked for 40 minutes. Not about the marriage. Not about decisions or lawyers or what happens next. Just talked. About small things first. Our daughter's new flat. The neighbor's dog that had been barking for 3 weeks straight. The boiler that needed servicing before winter. Ordinary things. Safe things. But underneath every ordinary sentence, something was moving. Something that had been frozen for a very long time. Then I asked him the question he had asked me. I said, Gerald, were you happy? The line went quiet. A long quiet. Longer than comfortable. Then he said, I was happy with you. I wasn't happy with us. And I didn't know how to separate the two. I wrote that down on the back of his envelope while he was still speaking. Because I knew immediately that sentence was the entire marriage. Everything we were. Everything we had failed to be. Compressed into 20 words. We didn't make any decisions that day. He stayed at the Premier Inn for 4 more nights. I know because he texted me each morning. Not love messages. Not reconciliation attempts. Just small check-ins. Slept better last night. Found a decent coffee place nearby. Boiler man is booked for Thursday. I called him before I left. That last one made me sit down. Because even while leaving, he had called the boiler man. I started writing him a letter 3 days after the phone call. Not a response exactly. More like my own version. My own accounting. It took me 11 days to finish it. I rewrote the opening 4 times. Because I kept starting with explanations, and what I needed to say had nothing to do with explaining. I dropped it at the Premier Inn front desk on a Wednesday afternoon. Didn't call ahead. Didn't tell him it was coming. The receptionist with the phone charger took it without blinking. Gerald called me that evening. 2 hours after I dropped it. He had been crying. I could hear it immediately. He didn't mention the letter directly. He just said, do you want to have dinner this week? And I said yes. Before he even finished the sentence. I said yes. We had dinner that Thursday. A small Italian place we hadn't been to in 12 years. We didn't hold hands. We didn't make promises. We just sat across from each other and ordered food and talked like 2 people who were finally willing to be honest about who they actually were. No performance. No history weighing every word down. Just 2 people starting a conversation 14 months overdue. The divorce papers were never signed. Not because we decided to stay, but because we decided to try something we had never properly attempted in 30 years, actually talking. We see a counselor now. Every Tuesday. Gerald still makes Sunday dinners. I actually sit with him in the kitchen now instead of disappearing upstairs. Small things. Deliberately chosen small things. His letter is in my bedside drawer. I've read it maybe 40 times. Not out of pain anymore. Out of reminder. Because that letter didn't end my marriage. It saved it. But only because he was finally brave enough to be honest, and I was finally still enough to hear it. If there is someone in your life you have been meaning to really talk to, not text, not assume, not postpone, don't wait for a letter on the kitchen table. You already know what you need to say. Go say it tonight.